Hello.
Hello.
Everyone, good. Ready to get going? Really excited about doing this particular subject because it fits into the puzzle of this whole issue of right to repair. Okay, and where does testing come in, and where does the FDA come in? I know I have a lot of folks. Well, the FDA doesn't regulate hospitals, etc. And I want to separate two key components. There's the HTMs and there are third-party service providers. Okay, and when we a lot of times those two get commingled together in these kind of talks to the detriment of everybody understanding what the heck is actually going on. So we're going to focus on why testing matters and who it matters to, and a lot of examples I want to give today. It's kind of a free form because the size of the group. If you have any questions on something that I bring up, which typically happens when I say something about the FDA, I see a lot of people roll their eyes at it. No, I don't know anything. What do they do anyway? So I know one thing. They're an agency that gets to carry their field inspectors can carry handguns, so that they're a lot different than an ISO auditor coming into your building. So from that perspective, my name's Wayne Moore. I've been in diagnostic ultrasound since about 1980. Entered into the field as a freshly minted EE and was on the first design team for creating an ultrasound device that had integrated fast Fourier transform analysis on the Doppler. From that, I just stayed in ultrasound. Now, if they outlawed ultrasound, I'd be out of work, that's for sure. So I really don't know how to do a lot other than that. One of the things we have to put this up there, they asked us to put up our background, but so you can read it at your leisure, or if you're drunk. But the other disclosure is I'm also the chair of AdvaMed. Anybody heard of AdvaMed? Anybody heard of MIDA? Oh, you're good. Yeah, I'll try telling the truth about all this. The AdvaMed is an advocacy group. It's the largest medical device advocacy group in the world, but in the United States, it focuses on nudging Congress to pass laws that are going to favor healthcare and medical devices that are an integral part, obviously, of healthcare. They advocate for new reimbursement codes or increases in reimbursement codes. And so I'm the chair of the service committee for AdvaMed. It's about 1,600 companies that belong to that group. So I'm going to bring in a perspective of what some people dub the evil guys, because those are OEMs. Ooh, no, I don't do that. But here's what we're going to cover. A little overview, how the FDA looks at this whole thing about testing, what our obligations are. We're a third-party service provider as well. Acertara repairs diagnostic imaging probes. I'm going to talk a little bit about reverse engineering, why ISO vetting matters. We're going to look at a Class 2 medical device, and we're going to get into the essential takeaways of the Q&A. Q&A can spread throughout the day. That's something, just raise your hand, and we'll deal with it as we go along. And you know, I might ask you a few questions as we go along, like, have you heard of that? That was a resounding no. But here's a question that sets the stage for what we're going to discuss. If you knew a piece of equipment was broken and produced questionable data, would you allow it to be used in your facility? Of course, the answer is no. Then why is it used without you having this knowledge? To me, it underscores the extraordinary value biomedical engineers bring to the hospital. And the way I like to put it is that HTMs are the thin blue line protecting patients from defective devices. You are the gateway. Technology comes into the hospital through you, and then it's dispersed into the hospital for use, and then you guys watch it. And you do things with it, and you calibrate it, and sometimes you repair it, and sometimes you have to send it out for repair. But you are the gatekeeper and the protector of the patient from technology that may be defective coming into your facility. Anybody heard of AIMI? Oh, that score. That's really good. Thank you. We're 1 out of 3, sound like the Russians. So here in 2015, AIMI produced this document, Supportability Task Force created a checklist, and knowing that we were going to have a dim bulb and even a dimmer screen here, I kind of put that in the last thing. If you send a device out for repair, how do you verify the quality of the repair when it comes back? That's one of the things that AIMI said all the HTMs should do. You should ask yourself that question. Are you taking the word for it of the person who's returning it to you? Are you plugging it in and hoping that the building doesn't burn down? How do you, what do you do? What is your criteria for navigating devices that come in and out of the hospital that have been repaired? Just a question to underscore that what your guys' responsibility is. So first thing that people ask on the right to repair, how does the FDA look at this? And the FDA has looked at this for a long time, since 1996, okay, when the first right to repair and the question about regulating third-party servicers came up. To be clear, and I want you to understand this, if you were a full-time employee of the hospital that you worked for, you were not a third party anymore. Third party comes out of the whole legal structure of a party of the first part is the OEM party, the second part is the buying entity, which is the hospital. There is no party of the third party. Third party servicing means those entities, and this is how the FDA will describe it, we'll see it in a little bit. It's how the FDA describes third-party servicers, okay? They are not employees. They are subject to regulation. Hospital HTMs are not subject to regulation as long as whatever you do to a system is, if it's not the right thing to do, you'll see what I mean. If you do, if the physician comes up and says, listen, I'm doing a little experiment on something, I need you to change this widget here and put this one in and wire it in, and you do all that. The FDA is not going to storm the Bastille and come and get you for doing that. But before you can ever send that machine out of the hospital again, back into commercial use, like a trade-in or something along that, you have to unbundle that, okay? Because it would be considered an adulterated product. So you guys are not in that category that we're going to be talking about a little bit about today. I'm going to focus on the responsibility of HTM to make sure that what comes in the hospital is going to benefit the patient. Here's the interesting thing. First thing we found out, if you can search the FDA document website forever, you'll never see a definition for, quote, bad repair. They don't do that. Here's what they do. FDA only offers 2 scenarios: repairs an activity that returns the device to the OEM specification. If it doesn't, then the activity is defined as remanufacturing. So again, so there's no such thing as a bad repair. They automatically say you have remanufactured the device. And if you remanufacture the device, it requires a new 510K, which is FDA clearance, to put that product back into the sea of commerce, okay? So they don't, FDA does not categorize a bad repair, but everyone in here has seen a bad repair, right? They call it remanufacturing so they can hold the person's feet to the fire with current regulations about manufacturing. So we've seen it time and time again, and I'll show you a couple of them examples. But an old adage sums up what bad repairs cost. Anybody know bad repairs cost? It's the most expensive repair you will ever have is a bad repair. Why is that? Because you didn't return it to its use, now you gotta buy another, right? So, and it may not be able to be repaired once you have done a bad repair on it. We've seen lots of those come through our facility. So today we're gonna see exactly what it takes to avoid bad repairs through objective testing, both pre and post repair, okay, of devices. One more quick question, just set the ground. How many of you search FDA documentation to find out about how that device was cleared? Do that? Okay, we learn to do that. And this works for any device, medical device, class 2 medical device. There are documents on the FDA website, but you can just go to Google and say, FDA clearance for MRI. And it'll give you, it'll pop up with a link to that guidance that will then tell you, just like this here, the lengthy guidance of what the OEM has to do in order to, in their submission, gain clearance for that device so it can go into interstate commerce. Now you have it. And you're going to see some powerful tools in that document for you to use when vetting a third-party service provider that you're contemplating sending something to. Questions to ask, and I'll have a template for that at the very end. You guys can use just however you'd like to, but it'll tell you, that document will tell you that what you should be looking for. Activities are not intended to significantly change the performance or safety specifications. Okay, and keywords here, and we'll go through some keywords. Significantly, that's a term that has no quantitation to it, right? Significant. One man's significant may be different than another's, right? Or one repair may look more than another's, but they use a lot of weasel words that we'll look at too. But this is their quote in their document, that are activities that are not intended to significantly change the performance or safety specifications. However, they should still be evaluated to determine whether they do. So it's not enough just to say, and some third-party guys, look, we've seen in documentation where they would say these things that, yeah, we didn't do anything significantly different. The FDA doesn't care. They want to know, did you validate that activity you performed on this medical device to show objective evidence that it is substantially equivalent to the OEM one? So they look at not what somebody says, but what their activities are, okay? And how they look at that. So they put this up there. They should still be evaluated whether they actually do significantly change the device's performance and safety specifications. And also, if there are multiple changes being done, when considered cumulatively, they may significantly change the performance or safety specifications. And here's something that's interesting from, you know, my expertise is in ultrasound, but one of the things that came from the FDA was there was a lot of confusion about AIAT. Everyone knows what that is. So for ionizing radiation devices, the manufacturers have to supply written documentation on how to assemble, install, adjust, and turn it on. I guess that's what the T stands for, not just kidding, and test. But the question came up, can I take an aftermarket tube, like a Dunley X-ray tube, and put it in this system that Dunley had it cleared to work in this system, and clearly the X-ray system has been cleared. Does that count for a certified part being put in? The answer is no, and that's what they wanted to get out to people. And this extends across the whole board. You can't just duct taping together two cleared products, but from different manufacturers, a tube from Dunlea, Philips for the X-ray device. Duct taping those both together, even though both of them were cleared, they were never cleared together as a device. And so there's testing that has to be done by Dunlea, and they have to go through a lot of stuff. So this extends to everything, and we'll see that in some of the examples when we get there, that it doesn't always turn out the way people think it would turn out by using a non-OEM part. And you'll learn a few questions you need to ask in that as well. So how the FDA looks at it, I want to kind of skip over this, but I just wanted to highlight a few things in words that they use. These are all their words. Should, understand by an FDA investigator or third party, recommend, all these kind of shoulds and recommends and everything else. But here's the interesting thing. The FDA used the same paradigm as the IRS. The IRS writes the code for in law of what taxpayers' responsibilities are. They are the sole definer of what the definitions are, and they are the sole prosecution for that. Same thing the FDA. So when they say should, it's code for you better do it. Okay? Because they'll come in and say, well, and some people look at that and say, well, should doesn't mean do it. And so, you know, we don't want to do that because it's too much work, or it's too hard for that a lot of times to do this work. Well, you have to do the work. You can't just say, we looked at it and said it didn't significantly change it, because the FDA would say, great, show me the documentation. Okay, so we're going to look at class 2 medical device. Everybody knows how the classes are differentiated. So class 2 is the ones that we're most familiar with in here, and in the HTM world. Those are medical imaging devices, pretty much everything. Class 1 is extremely low risk things. Used to be a tissue fan was a class 1 medical device, even though it didn't do anything. Class 3 is generally reserved for pharmaceuticals, so we're not going to talk about that. Here's how the FDA looks at it. Here are the guiding principles that the FDA outlined in the document they released last year about what constitutes remanufacturing versus servicing. Assess whether there is a change to the intended use. Clearly, you can't introduce a new clinical use into a device by changing something. That happened. Everybody's seen an ultrasound probe, right? Should run. I'll do sock probe. Okay, so a curved array or a linear array probe is often used for biopsy guidance, right? And sometimes companies like Civco, which specializes in biopsy attachments, will make a device strictly for that probe, okay? But we have seen, and it's on the shelf, and so we've seen probes come in from hospitals and say, my biopsy guide doesn't fit on this anymore. And we look at it, and whoever replaced the shell with something they made. I don't know if they 3D printed it or if they just did a low run on this particular plastic, but it didn't have the notches on it for the biopsy. You've changed the intended use by omission. Okay, so that would be considered by the FDA as an adulterated product. Okay, so assess whether there's a change to the intended use, determine whether the activities individually or cumulatively change significantly the safety or performance specifications of a device, which means you have to know what the system specifications of that device are. How would you not? If you didn't know that, you couldn't determine that by testing. Evaluate whether any changes to a device require new marketing submission. Assess component, part, or material dimensional and performance specifications. Employ a risk-based approach. Adequately document decision making. This is an interesting one, and I don't know why I keep doing that. I have a laser here. Does that work? Now, oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. So the material dimensional stuff. I want to show you something. Hope you're sitting down. A few years ago, there was a recall on the Alaris pump. And it was a Alaris model 8100. There were 2,452 pumps distributed between July 10th and February 18th. There were 62 complaints reported about this device and 1 death. And so, of course, the FDA then, contacts the manufacturer, BD, and says, we've got these complaints. What happened? Okay. Just happened to happen. So one of the defective pumps was sent to us for forensic evaluation of the materials that were used. The dimensions were great. Here was the scenario. Listen to this carefully. Third-party company in the United States sent a completed one to China and said, make us one of these and need it for this price. So they made it perfectly with dimensions, but they used a different material, and that's what happened. So when you see these posts right here, you guys probably know this too, the OEM actually specs the torque level that you have to screw the screw down these things. But when you did, with the material they used, it split post, and they broke off, allowing free flow of the chemicals into the patient's body. So here's a case where the dimensions were perfect, but they used the wrong material. They used a material that had a Shore hardness strength that was 1/2 of what the OEM's Shore hardness strength was. So it just couldn't. And then they put a brass fitting in there instead of an aluminum fitting, which the OEM had, and they just screwed it down until it was real tight. They didn't torque it, or they didn't know what torque was anyway. So they came back, looked good to the third party. They sent them to the hospital. 2,100 different pumps were sent out. All of them had to be recalled. Resulted in 1 patient death. This is why testing is important, and testing to the level that you have got to understand what the heck you're doing when you're repairing these things. If you're having parts made that are non-OEM parts, how are you validating that those things work according to specifications? And no one had done that. They just said, here, make one of these. So the FDA says they get third-party service providers to do this, especially in the situation where you're making non-OEM parts as replacement, okay? And it's a risk-based assessment, which throws up a risk matrix like this with probability of harm on one, severity of harm on the other, and then you can see it populated with the various colors that say acceptable, investigate, and stop. Don't do that, okay? So unacceptable risk requires further risk reduction. If somebody would have used this template, the company used this template and say, well, here's everything that we're going to have to know about this thing. And it explodes. That's why you go on the FDA website and say, well, what does it take to get this pump 510K cleared? And in that document, it will list anything that they think will make it, that you have to factor in whether or not you're going to make a new part for it. Okay? So that's why you want to get this. I heard it earlier this morning, the talk on right to repair. One of the things he said that struck me is you guys are responsible for thousands of different models of products and everything else. You can't be a subject matter expertise on all of this. You can focus it down and say, I know what's allowed, and I know what's not allowed, and to come in, and I know how those things need to be tested and validated, and acquire that of any company that we're going to use. So here's what the FDA did. They came out with the remanufacturing document. They gave flow charts that allowed people to make objective decisions. I won't go too far into this, but I know it's really small. You can read it later. So A1 right up in here says, add, remove, or change a component, part, material that directly or indirectly contacts body tissue. Okay. Does it? Yeah. Then you have to go over here. Is there a significant change to device performance or safety specifications? If it is, you see these are all going to say that's likely remanufacturing. You have to file a 510K for it. If they keep looping back and saying no, then it says it's likely not remanufacturing. Everybody see the wiggle word that the FDA used? What is that? Likely. They use likely. Likely remanufacturing or likely not remanufacturing. So they didn't say this is, so it gives them the room to kind of say, no, it is. So objective evidence is not based on what someone says, but on factual documentation. And that's what you ought to request, demand from any third-party service provider you're using. You're sending out systems or subsystems even to be repaired. What are they doing? So people ask me, well, Wayne, do the OEMs give you all their specifications and stuff on their probes and what materials they use? Not likely. They're not required to do that. That's proprietary, sometimes proprietary, sometimes patented. So we and I know other companies have too, third-party companies have invested in reverse engineering. So for example, I took one, this is a 2D matrix array probe, an X5-1C. It's a phased array probe made by Philips. It was controlled by an ASIC up in the housing, so we needed to reverse engineer that probe ASIC, what turned it on, what its control lines looked like. This is all what popped out on the other side. Our cryptology guy would freak over this. So we get all of that data here, and then we create a device, a machine that can go in and test array elements and cable wires for failures. So we can actually go in and when we plug the probe into our device, our testing device, it thinks it's hooked up to the ultrasound machine and it starts transmitting. And then we collect all of the data here, confirm everything is working. So then we have to have objective performance. We demonstrate compliance with the FDA guidelines. And here's what they were saying, okay? The FDA says, like new OEM transducers, non-OEM replacement and remanufacturing transducers are new medical devices. As such, they are subject to this. So we have to examples of action that could be considered remanufacturing and changing the acoustic stack, the array or electrical component or patient contact material, because it's also subject to biocompatibility. So by reverse engineering, we're able to demonstrate to the FDA that it is substantially equivalent to what is produced by the OEM. It's not just saying we put it on a fan and say, I see an image. That's not going to cut it. So we do a lot of reverse engineering. Here's one with exploded up here using a device, a commercially available testing device called a Huntron, and then programming it to look for variances in circuit analysis. And we saw this little bump right here, and it's not supposed to be a contiguous line going from red into the brown area. There's this little bump here. It's like an aneurysm. And it showed that there was a preamp component in the connector, that probe, that was defective. So we went in and replaced the little preamp that was defective, and I don't know, charged the hospital a few $100. They would have had to send this back to Philips, and Philips won't fix it. They replaced it for $20,000. Okay, so there's a huge reason for doing that. So, example illustrating a general rule. Let's look at an ultrasound probe real quick. Reconciling the FDA documents. Like I said, all you have to do is FDA ultrasound clearance. Type those words in, and this will pop up your Google screen, and you say remanufacturing or servicing, and this document will pop up. So the key here in doing, and why testing matters, is so that we can reconcile those two, what those two documents are asking for from the FDA, that we could show you and also the FDA that our activities are restoring the device to its original specifications, okay? Substantially. They always allow variances because even OEMs have variances. So I go back, and so here's this device, or this document, and I'm going to explode that up. Here's the table of contents. Again, doesn't matter if it's ultrasound, MRI, CT. You go down into additional considerations. That's at the very bottom of the table of contents. And it'll tell you non-OEM replacement transducers and remanufactured transducers. And then you go and you look at that, and it will tell you, if you're a provider, in determining whether or not you're validating and verifying that you're returning that device to substantial equivalence to the OEM. Does it make sense? Okay, so we're validating that we're going to demonstrate that and have documentation. I know you guys are big on documentation as well. And they'll say, in addition to all this stuff in the body of this whole guidance, they also recommend that you do all this too, which includes testing. So we do at our facility for companies, OEMs who are looking to get their ultrasound system in the market. We're the company that does the testing, acoustic power testing for them for that submission. But it said, if you're going to change the acoustic stack, you need to make acoustic output comparisons between the replacement you're going to be put in there and the OEM. You got to do at least 3 of them to show statistics. Okay, and you just can't. And there are arrays coming in from China up until the what do they call it now? Tariffs. Yeah, thank you. Up until the tariffs, they were coming in from multiple Chinese manufacturers making knockoffs of Philips arrays and Siemens arrays and all these other arrays, and people who were doing repairs over here were just putting them in, and it worked, right? It worked. They plug it in the machine, it kind of makes an image, so good to go. But that doesn't. It could have higher output power. It could have lower output power. Higher output power means there's a safety issue for the patient. Lower acoustic output power means there is a problem that the patient could run into. The probe is not working in its output. So you misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis. Okay, all of these things have to be. So there's an Appendix C quote in each one of the machines that is cleared, and then it'll show you then what you need to consider in your risk-based analysis, whether or not you have enough objective evidence to document and substantiate your activity is in fact a repair, if you're substantially equivalent, or if it's remanufacturing. It's remanufacturing, you have to file a new 5T. Make sense? You guys are good. Okay. Here's what it looks like. Here's a sample of the test that we supply to the OEMs, where we look at all of these variants here on the acoustic performance of their acoustic stack. And the important one, the two special controls on ultrasound devices is the acoustic output power and the temperature. Okay, the lens temperature and also the focal point temperature of the ultrasound beam. So the maximum the FDA allows for acoustic output power is 720 milliwatts per square centimeter, and you have to be substantially below that. Again, because if there's statistics and you have variance of what that has to be, you don't want to be right at the limit. get any variance, you're going to pop over the limit. So almost every OEM that I've ever worked with, 40 years ago, has, usually drops it down in 500 so max, so that their production variance will be okay. So that, and then the other one is the thermal, like I was talking about. And so the MI and the TI, and those are displayed on the monitor of the ultrasound device as the sonographer is using it, are the control devices that you have to look at. So, examples of actions that could be considered remanufactured are changing the acoustic stack, electrical component, or the patient contact material. There are, in addition to the FDA documents, and the FDA documents point you back to what the OEM is responsible for in terms of standards that they need to follow and test to validate that their product is going to be safe and effective, okay, according to the guidelines. So here's just a few of them, and these are basically focused on the ultrasound probe. There's a couple more that are added from the system, software, and hopefully nobody's out there trying to change the code on the software as a third-party repair kind of function. So here's the 5 bullet points that really take a look at each one of those things. So you read those and you go, okay, I have to make sure that the electrical leakage is right. So you have to look at that for ultrasound probes under 50 microamps of electrical leakage in use, etc., like that. If you're using improper materials or you're not performing the replacement of a lens correctly on a transducer, you can create paths for fluid ingress and also electrical shock. So that's 60601-1. And then lens surface temperature, what touches the patient. That lens can never generate heat above 43 degrees C. Has to be in there. It starts to burn the patient. They don't like that. I haven't found one that like it yet. And then also there's biocompatibility testing that needs to be done, etc. So here it is. So the lens, here's transducer. These are the FDA will tell you in the guidance document what standards apply for that particular device. Okay. So, and all of you have heard of those standards, right? The IEC standards, etc., because you're doing electrical leakage testing on all kinds of stuff in the hospital and everything. So the lens material is subject to all of these. The housing material, these. And the cable, again, different ones. There are also fluid ingress. How deep can you put the probe into fluid for cleaning, etc., like that, so that you don't allow fluid ingress. So there's a lot of those things that us, as third-party service providers, we have to be subject matter experts in this. You just have to know what is supposed to be required, so you can ask the question from the potential vendor you're going to use. Send me your data on this testing. If they say, well, we like to keep that close to the vest, should send off some alarms. Here's some examples. I love these. So this is the endocavitary probe sent in by the hospital, and they said, we sent this out for repair to some call company X, and it came back and the sonographer's complaining it doesn't have depth penetration, so it doesn't compare to the other probes. So they sent it to us for a forensic to see what was going on. We noticed that the cap was a little, its coloring looked a little suspicious to us. So we took that off and we put it in our acoustic tank, and we looked at dome transmission loss as a function of frequency. Here's the loss over here. This is how the OEM behaved, the OEM probe. Here's what the material that was made by another company was, and that explains the lack of depth of penetration. And so that does not equal substantial equivalence. They want to see lines of identity that lay on top of each other in close proximity to each other. When they see something like this, it's not substantial equivalence. So, and again, you can reverse engineer these things. You don't have to guess, and the OEM is not going to tell you what it is, but we have tools available to us that we use, and a lot of folks do. And ours is Fourier transform infrared spectrometry, where we can put a probe that hooks up to the device on the material itself, and it'll show us what that spectrum looks like. And then it'll not only what it looks like, they have a huge library of what those spectrums look like from the maker of the device, and it'll tell you exactly what it is. And it says, oh yeah, that's a polyethanol acetate material. And so you can understand what it is, you can measure it, you can measure how thick the OEM cap is, because the thickness is going to change the attenuation of it. So there's all kinds of tools available, but it's hard work for sure. But I think patients deserve hard work. That's our opinion. That's been the way we've done things. Here's a couple of situations. Got another probe in where we look at this and go, oh, somebody repaired that and just got a little frisky with the material here and didn't make it equal and homogeneous throughout the face of the transducer. Here's what the sonographer was seeing is all these multiple ring downs right here. So did an analysis on the percent error matching with layer thickness variations, and you can see, here's it's supposed to look like this, although it should be all the way across, should be normalized. And if you start messing with the thickness of it, you're going to change what the response is, and you're going to recognize that in the image. The sonographer, it just doesn't image like it's used to. Okay, I've heard that so many. It's fuzzy. Well, we'll fix the fuzzy. Send it in. Everybody know what this is? Can anybody see it? It's a durometer, right? So it's how we measure short A hardness strength. We also discovered that was a gumball. Here's an array. This is a report from our system called First Call, and here's the sensitivity of an OEM array. Here was the sensitivity of an array that came from China, and the hospital complained that the depth of penetration wasn't there. Again, it does not equal substantial equivalence to the OEM. It shouldn't be used, or they should have filed a 510K. They don't even know that they're supposed to do that, in our experience. We talked about taking things off of the probe. We have this is what the sonographer was complaining about. You see all the noise bars in there and everything else like that, rolling noise bars in real time. It's pretty spectacular. Never did that before, and so we got it in. We popped it open to take a look. Whoever went in there took out the EMI shielding material and also adulterated the grounds on the side here. So it was just any noise in the hospital. Anybody ever seen a Bobby next to an ultrasound machine? Oh my word, it's pretty interesting. Or a microwave oven for that matter in the room next to it. You lose your EMI shielding, that's what you're going to get. So taking things out, not putting things back in, I mean, that doesn't sound like a very good practice for that. The other thing too is every OEM has certain cleaning and disinfection guidelines for reusable devices. all know that, right? So, and they publish that data so that the cleaning personnel within the hospital or even the sonographer, if they're doing the cleaning, would know what types of high-level disinfecting solutions they can use. They don't tell them what they can't use. They just say, here's what we validate. So you better use these. So these are the disinfection guidelines, and we've noticed that people don't check that. That's another thing. If you're going to replace the insertion component, the handle component, the dome, and you're going to use a material that has non-deterministic characteristics because you didn't do the testing, you don't know if it'll survive the cleaning or high-level disinfection, right? And this is from the FAIUM, and every protocol is outlined for these things, very tightly controlled, especially for intercavitary probes. As you can imagine, surgical probes sometimes have to be sterilized even. And so this contributes to the life and early death of the probe if they aren't followed. Here's a new one. I don't usually call out companies, but I'll just use its initials, Trophon. But here's a new one. Shore hardness strength of a new one. Here, we tested 3 times. It was 88, 90, 91. Relens using a non-OEM material had a Shore hardness strength of 52. Okay, if you're familiar with that, that would be like some stale bubble gum chewed the night before, and then in the morning it's kind of gets hard again. That's about how hard 52 is. 88 is basically a big tire. Okay. And so what happens is they put this thing in with this kind of material. They put it in the Trophon, ran what the Trophon op manual said, keep it in there for X amount of time, whatever that time is, and it came out and it had eaten away the lens, and the heated chemical that they used then was saturated into the acoustic stack and killed the probe. So they basically had to buy a probe. When if the lens would have been tested correctly and they'd used the right material, it'd been back up and running. Okay, so here's some essential takeaways. Number 1, use vendors who can readily show they know and understand the testing requirements of the FDA for that particular device. They've got to know that, because they don't, if not, they're flying blind. They don't know what it is they're supposed to test to. They might get into a trap of, well, you know, this part, we can use this part, you know, the dimensions are correct. We discovered early on in the talk that just getting the dimensions right doesn't fix anything. Okay? Ask for objective evidence. You should have the ability to ask for objective evidence, documentation that demonstrates the vendor is validating parts that it's using, materials, and components that return the repaired device to substantial equivalence to the OEM. Okay? And for safety, efficacy, and make sure that you haven't messed, they haven't messed with the intended use of the product by leaving something off. Okay? It's a case of the biopsy that we're talking about. So ensure also the vendor has the subject matter expertise and technology to perform relevant testing and to perform adequate and traceable validation. They should have all this. At a minimum, use only vendors who are currently 13485 2016 registered for the correct activity, and that's important. So here's, you've probably all seen what the certificate looks like, but what you want is then to send you a copy of that certificate, and you say, I'm going to be sending this company probes for repair, for example. So make sure you just don't look, oh yeah, they're 1340, but that's not a halo to repair everything. It has a scope right above it that actually defines down what it can, what this certificate is good for. And just design and development of processes, technologies, fixtures, and tools used in the repair, refurbishment of of diagnostic imaging probes. Okay, very, very specific. Okay? I can't fix an MRI machine and claim that I did something under 1345 because we were never validated. So make sure at least you get, they say, yeah, we have one, and if it's posted, a couple of things you look for, if it's posted, we see this all the time, that, yeah, they do. They have a 1345 certificate posted. And it had expired 4 years ago, pre-COVID, but so you got to look at when it expires too. So I always tell people, look at the scope and make sure it hasn't expired. Okay, those are two key things with the 13485 that you want to get to. Okay, so cool. The other thing, anybody ever filled out an MDR? Oh, you're blessed. So it's this one is filled out by them. And you've got to do a little bit of investigation because there's a question on here that said, down here, this is for MedWatch, was this device serviced by a third party? They put no. Turns out when we did the work for the company and for at the request of the FDA, it had been repaired. So this guy got in a little bit of heat because he didn't check. He just, I don't know what it is, or her brain. But here's what I do know. If you don't know, find out. Don't just check these boxes because that does go to the and if it says no, it wasn't replaced by or repaired by a third party, they go after the OEM, right? But if it's checked, yes, it was repaired by a third party. Now they have to also bring in that third party and say, "How did you do this?" And I know you guys know that, but sometimes we get in a hurry filling out a form or something, but that is an extremely important thing when patient death and injury has been involved. Make sure that you put on here the right information. Make sure that you have justification for having sent this device out for repair to this company. But how did you, well, their price was the best. That's not going to cut it in the investigation. Okay. You got to say, we got their certification, it's up to date, scored this thing. We asked how they did the testing, had this template that I'm going to show you. If that was filled out and signed by them, you're cut off. Okay. But so just keep that in mind because the FDA is paying more and more attention to this because of the visibility of right to repair across the board. So when you hear right to repair, just remember it means a lot more than just my ability to take something apart and fix it and put it back together. That there's in medical devices. This is why it's been so hard to gain any traction in Congress or even in state levels for complex medical devices because they go, oh, do they know all this stuff? No. I mean, if you ever fixed a toaster, pretty straightforward device. It's different than an MRI machine. It's different than an ultrasound. They have to be subject matter experts. And you, as HTMs, are that thin blue line that keeps the crap out of your hospital and looks at those. Here's what those issues. Hospitals and advocates such as the American Institute of Ultrasound Medicine pushing for this really hard. It said testing should be, any testing that should be done by the third party should be documented and provided to the clinic upon return of the repaired probe. If it does not meet the imaging standards of the OEM, then the probe should be regarded as not repaired. That one's pretty straightforward. So if the sonographer comes back and says, this stinks, what happened? That's a flag for you for a little bit of investigation. What happened? Okay. So paying for a repair that was not properly done only lowers the quality of the medical care while raising the cost. And I just said at the beginning, right? Most expensive repair you'll ever have. It's a bad repair. Okay, so here's the template. You can clearly see all this down here. Now, it's on their website, Expo's website, so you can go and download this, but have them send you this declaration of conformity, put their company letterhead on it, and tell them, here's what we want. Have a little folder for them so they can document it. Have this information inside of it. Then monitor it to make sure nothing has changed. Like I said, sometimes these things, some companies get bought by private equity. Private equity firms, quality stuff costs too much money. Let's just do it's another private equity. So monitor as well. And for everything, look, you guys have to find out. I do. Everybody can say. Do a risk-based analysis. What devices am I sending out that go back to that graph that I had? That if it's not done properly, could be in the red zone. Okay. And make sure that you bias your inquiries or your template toward those issues first, okay? And then you can expand it as a function of time, as you have time to other less risky, less hazardous things. I don't want you to do this for tongue depressors. I don't think you guys buy tongue depressors, but and certainly not call them fix them. So that's it. Those are my dogs, Lulu and George, and they send their best regards. So, questions? Yes.
Is this a slideshow now?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be on the Indeed Expo website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them.
All of them. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.